The infant's pod screamed through the warp like a dying star, tearing a wound in reality that shouldn't exist. On the world of Barbarous, where poison fog choked the valleys and warlords ruled from mountain fortresses, something impossible fell from the sky. The Emperor of Mankind stood in the toxic mist, his golden armor untouched by the corrosive air, watching the pod's descent. He had felt this arrival across the galaxy, a soul so bright it burned like a second sun in the immaterium. Not one of his suns. Something else, something that defied the laws he understood. The pod struck the mountainside with enough force to vaporize rock, but when the dust cleared, the child inside was unharmed. The Emperor reached into the crater and lifted the boy. Kryptonian cells drank in the yellow sun's radiation. The infant's eyes opened, glowing faintly red, and the Emperor saw in them a purity that even his Primarchs lacked. No chaos taint, no genetic degradation, just raw, endless power waiting to be shaped. He named the boy Kal-El, but the Imperium would come to know him by another name, the Solar Primarch, the last son of a dead world, the Emperor's 20th Legion Master. On Terra, in the gene forges deep beneath the Himalayan peaks, the Mechanicum labored to create a new Space Marine Legion from this impossible genetic template. They failed. Kryptonian DNA rejected every attempt at replication. It could not be copied, could not be diluted, could not be mass-produced into the Astartes mold. Kal-El would stand alone, one being of incalculable power, raised in the Imperial Creed, trained in the art of war by the master of mankind himself. By the time the Great Crusade reached its height, Kal-El had conquered 17 star systems without a single Imperial casualty. He moved through battlefields faster than human eyes could track, turning enemy war machines into scrap with his bare hands, speaking words of compliance that felt like Imperial truth made manifest. The other Primarchs watched him with fascination and unease. He was not their brother. He was something the Emperor had found, not made. And in the cold mathematics of the Imperium's expansion, Kal-El represented a troubling equation. Unlimited power bound only by the moral constraints of a being who had never known weakness, never felt hunger, never watched comrades die, because he was too slow or too weak to save them. The War Council chamber, aboard the battle barge Eternal Crusader, held 17 of the Emperor's finest, and the air tasted like tension and recycled oxygen. Kal-El stood at the edge of the hololithic display, his crimson cape marked with the aquila hanging motionless despite the ship's movement. He didn't wear power armor like the Primarchs. He didn't need it. His uniform was simple, blue and red, colors that meant nothing to the Imperium, but everything to the man who wore them. Rogel Dawn spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of fortifications and siege logic. The Ulanor sector requires 6 Legion deployments to secure. The Orc Empire there has grown beyond conventional containment. Horus, not yet the War Master, leaned forward over the tactical display. His charm filled the room like oxygen returning to a void. 6 legions tie up resources we need in the Ghoul stars. We're stretched across too many fronts. Kal-El's eyes flickered across the hololithic projection, processing fleet positions, supply lines, enemy concentrations, civilian populations. He saw the variables the way the Emperor had taught him. Every life a number, every number a responsibility, every responsibility a weight he was strong enough to carry. "Send me," Kal-El said quietly. Gilliman, always the logistician, shook his head. "The projections show 3 million orcs concentrated in the primary hive clusters alone. Their gargants outnumber our titans. Even with your capabilities, a solo deployment risks." "I don't risk," Kal-El interrupted, and it wasn't arrogance. It was mathematics. "I've studied the reports. Orc leadership hierarchies collapse when you remove the war boss. I can locate and eliminate their command structure in 72 hours. The Wag energy dissipates, the Empire fragments. Conventional forces can handle the cleanup." Mortarion, wrapped in his rebreather and toxic atmosphere, made a sound like grinding metal. "You speak of war like an equation, like the galaxy bends to your certainty." Kal-El turned to face the Death Lord, and his eyes held something the Primarchs rarely saw, genuine confusion. doesn't it? If you have the power to end suffering quickly, isn't it your duty to use it? Mortarian's laugh was bitter poison, spoken like someone who's never failed, never watched his strength mean nothing against the right enemy. The other Primarchs shifted. They'd all heard the stories. Kal-El's 17 campaigns, 17 perfect victories, 0 casualties. The kind of record that made even genetically perfected demigods feel inadequate. Horus moved to diffuse the tension with practiced ease. The Emperor granted you autonomy in tactical decisions, Kal-El. If you believe you can resolve Ulanor alone, the Crusade fleet supports your judgment. Kal-El nodded once, sharp and military, then turned toward the exit. As he reached the doorway, Lorgar's voice stopped him. The word-bearer's tone carried genuine curiosity, not challenge. Do you ever doubt, ever wonder if the path you've chosen serves the greater good or simply serves your own need to be the solution? Kal-El paused. For 3 seconds he stood absolutely still, and in that stillness the Primarchs saw something that troubled them more than his power. He was actually considering the question, examining it with the same intensity he brought to enemy fleet positions. I was raised to believe that power without purpose is tyranny, Kal-El said finally. The Emperor gave me purpose. I serve humanity. If doubt interfered with that service, I'd be failing the only father I've ever known. He left before anyone could respond. The Primarchs remained silent for a long moment after the door sealed. Finally, Fulgrim spoke, his perfect features troubled. He believes every word he says. That's what concerns me, Alfarius replied from the shadows. A weapon that thinks it's a shepherd. 3 days later, Kal-El stood in low orbit above Ulanor Prime, floating in the hard vacuum, watching the green-scarred planet rotate beneath him. His enhanced vision pierced through atmospheric layers, counting orc positions, identifying weapon emplacements, tracking the massive gargant war machines that stalked between fungal forests and scrap metal cities. The vox in his ear crackled. Solar Primarch, this is Fleet Command. We have you on tactical display, confirming deployment authorization. Confirmed, Kal-El responded. Beginning descent. Maintain orbital position. If I'm not back in 72 hours, deploy the Legion. Understood. Emperor protects. Kal-El didn't respond to that. He'd never understood why humans said it. The Emperor had created tools for humanity's protection. The Space Marines, the Imperial Army, the Mechanicum war machines. Prayer seemed redundant when you had orbital bombardment capabilities. He dropped into the atmosphere like a golden meteor, air friction heating his skin to temperatures that would vaporize a ceramic. Below, Orc lookouts saw the falling star and bellowed warnings in their brutal language. By the time they raised their weapons, Kal-El had crossed 40 kilometers and punched through the roof of the primary Gargant construction facility. The impact crater was 12 meters wide. Orcs died in the shock wave, crushed by falling metal and displaced air pressure. Kal-El stood in the center of the destruction, dust settling around him, and allowed himself one moment of regret. He had tried to minimize casualties, tried to calculate the precise impact point that would disable the facility without killing the workers. But orcs built their factories around their forges, and orcs lived where they worked, and there was no such thing as a clean strike against an enemy that weaponized every aspect of their existence. The surviving orcs recovered quickly. They always did. That's what made them dangerous. They didn't retreat from superior force. They charged into it, bellowing challenges and spraying bullets with weapons that shouldn't function but did anyway, because orcs believed they would. Kal-El moved through them like judgment. His fists crumpled metal, his heat vision carved through war machines. He didn't kill unless necessary, disabling instead, breaking weapons and limbs, but leaving orcs alive, because some part of him, some buried core that the Emperor's training had never fully suppressed, still believed in mercy. It took him 40 minutes to realize his mistake. The orcs weren't retreating. They were getting excited. Every display of power made them happier, louder, more eager to fight. The war energy wasn't dissipating, it was growing. An orc war boss, 3 meters of muscle and cybernetic enhancement, crashed through a factory wall, wielding a power claw that crackled with stolen Imperial technology. You used a strong one, finally, a proper fight. Kal-El caught the power claw mid-swing. The weapon's disruption field screamed against his palm, but his grip didn't falter. He looked into the war boss's red eyes and saw something that troubled him deeply. joy. Pure, uncompromised joy at finding a worthy opponent. "Stand down," Kal-El said, pumping authority into his voice the way the Emperor had taught him. "Your empire is over. Surrender, and your troops will be processed according to Imperial compliance protocols." The war boss laughed, a sound like grinding gears and explosions. "Surrender? What's that? We's orcs. We don't give up, we fight." The Power Claw's second blade stabbed forward. Kal-El released the first blade and caught the second, then twisted his wrists in opposite directions. The Power Claw shattered. Sparks and metal fragments showered across the factory floor. The war boss stared at his broken weapon for one stunned second, then grinned wider. "Oh, this is gonna be good." He headbutted Kal-El with enough force to crack tank armor. Kal-El's head snapped back 2 centimeters, then returned to center. He hadn't felt pain, hadn't felt anything except the dull pressure of impact. And in that moment, staring at the war boss's delighted expression, Kal-El understood what Mortarion had meant. The galaxy didn't bend to his certainty. It bent to its own rules. And the Orc rule was simple: the biggest fight is the best fight. His presence wasn't ending the war, it was making it worse. Dassen, Kal-El's fist went through the war boss's chest cavity in a single motion, precise and surgical, destroying the primary heart and 3 major organs without unnecessary trauma to surrounding tissue. The war boss looked down at the hole in his torso, then up at Kal-El's face, and his expression shifted from joy to something closer to respect. "Now that's proper." He collapsed. Kal-El caught him before he hit the ground, lowering the body with care that seemed absurd given the circumstances. Around him, the factory had gone quiet. Hundreds of orcs stared at the fallen war boss, their small brains processing the impossible their leader had lost. For 5 seconds, the silence held, then the shouting started. New boss, Tashini, get is the new boss." Kal-El's enhanced hearing picked up the chant spreading outward from the factory, racing through Vox networks and orc war horns, carried by runners and broadcasters, and the strange psychic resonance that connected all greenskins. Within minutes, every orc on Ullanor Prime would know the unstoppable Humi had killed Warboss Urlak. The unstoppable Humi was the new Warboss. "No," Kal-El said firmly, addressing the nearest orcs. "I'm not your leader. I'm here to bring Imperial compliance. You will disarm and submit to processing, or—" "Wah!" an orc bellowed, charging forward with a chain chopper raised high. Wah! Another joined and another, and suddenly the entire factory floor erupted in a green tide of violence aimed directly at their new favorite target. Kal-El flew straight up through the factory's ceiling, breaking into open air, trying to gain distance to reassess. Below, orcs poured out of buildings, pointing at the sky, working themselves into a frenzy. His tactical assessment had been wrong. Killing the war boss hadn't ended the war. It had refocused it entirely on him. He activated his Vox link. "Fleet command, situation has escalated. Orc forces are consolidating rather than fragmenting, requesting immediate tactical re-evaluation." The response came through, crackling with static. "Confirmed, Solar Primarch. Long-range augurs show orc activity intensifying across all hive clusters. They're converging on your position. Recommend extraction." "Negative. Extraction validates their excitement. I need to demonstrate overwhelming force, make them understand that fighting me is futile." There was a pause on the other end. When the fleet officer spoke again, his voice carried careful neutrality. "Respectfully, sir, that may not be possible with orcs. Their Xenos psychology doesn't process deterrence the way human forces do." Kal-El closed his eyes, floating 2 kilometers above a planet that should have been simple, should have been another perfect campaign. 17 victories. Now this. Acknowledged, proceeding with revised strategy will disable their capacity for organized warfare, targeting gargant production facilities, ammunition depots, and fuel reserves. Once their ability to sustain the We'ar is eliminated, conventional forces can contain the population. Understood. How long do you estimate? Kal-El's eyes opened, glowing faintly red as he scanned the planet below. 48 hours. He didn't wait for a response. He dove back into the atmosphere, accelerating to speeds that turned air into plasma around him, and began the systematic dismantling of Ulanor's war machine. For 2 days and nights the planet shook. Gargant factories exploded in precisely calculated detonations. Ammunition depots went up in controlled bursts that maximized material destruction while minimizing orc casualties. Fuel reserves burned in columns of black smoke that painted the sky. Kal-El worked without stopping, without eating, without rest, because his Kryptonian biology didn't need those things. He was efficient. He was thorough. He was exactly what the Emperor had trained him to be, and the orcs loved every second of it. They gathered in massive mobs to watch him work, cheering when he demolished buildings, roaring approval when he punched through war machines, treating the systematic destruction of their infrastructure like the greatest entertainment Alinor had ever seen. By the end of the 48 hours, Kal-El had destroyed 70% of Alinor's military production capacity, and the Y energy had doubled. He stood in the center of what had been the planet's largest Gargant assembly yard, surrounded by twisted metal and shattered machinery, and admitted something he'd never had to admit before. "I'm making it worse," the Vox crackled. "Solar Primarch, this is War Master Horus. The Emperor has reviewed your tactical reports. He's ordering immediate withdrawal and full Legion deployment. You've done everything possible. It's time to let the Legions finish this." Kal-El looked at the ruins around him, at the orcs rebuilding already, hammering scrap into new weapons, singing war songs about the shiny Humi who brought such good fights. "I failed. You encountered an enemy whose psychology doesn't align with conventional deterrence models," Horus said, and his voice carried genuine understanding. "It's not failure, it's learning. Even Primarchs learn, brother." "I'm not your brother," Kal-El said quietly. "I'm not even human." "You serve humanity, that's close enough." The words should have comforted him. They didn't. Kal-El activated his emergency extraction beacon and flew toward the orbital rendezvous point, leaving Alinor Prime behind. Below, the orcs watched him go with something almost like affection. The shiny Git had given them the best 2 days they'd ever had. 3 weeks later, 6 Space Marine legions deployed to Ulanor in full force, and the grinding, brutal work of actual compliance began. It took 8 months. 14,000 Space Marines died. 2 Primarchs were wounded. The Imperial Army lost 300,000 soldiers. And somewhere in the quiet aftermath, as Kal-El stood in the Eternal Crusader's observation deck, watching the pacified planet rotate below, Mortarion approached. The Death Lord's presence was announced by the smell of toxins and the hiss of his rebreather. "You were right," Kal-El said before Mortarion could speak. "I spoke like someone who'd never failed." Mortarion stood beside him, both of them staring at Alinor. "The Emperor chose us for different purposes. You're the symbol, the impossible standard, the hero who saves everyone. And you? I'm the one who survives when saving everyone isn't possible." They stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Kal-El asked the question that had been haunting him since the factory floor. "Does the suffering ever stop feeling like a personal failure?" Mortarion's laugh was quiet and bitter. "No, but you learn to carry it. That's what makes us weapons instead of saviors." Kal-El didn't respond. He couldn't, because deep in his core, in the place where Kryptonian certainty met Imperial conditioning, he still believed he should be able to save everyone. Still believed that enough power, properly applied, could fix anything. And Alinor had proven that belief wrong in a way that no amount of training could undo. On the planet below, Imperial administrators began the work of integration, processing orc populations, establishing garrison forces, rebuilding infrastructure. In the battle barge's mess hall, guardsmen lined up for reconstituted protein rations that tasted like recycled cardboard. A soldier, 2 places back in line, complained about the food. "Could be worse," his squad mate said. "Could be on cleanup duty. They're still finding orc body parts in the southern hive zones." "At least body parts don't fill out paperwork. I've been processing compliance forms for 6 days. My handwriting's worse than the orc's architecture." Someone laughed. It was tired and thin, but genuine. The small rebellions of human endurance against the grinding machinery of imperial bureaucracy. Kal-El heard it from 6 decks away, his superhuman senses piercing through bulkheads and corridor noise. He listened to the guardsmen joke about rations and paperwork and the mundane frustrations of war, and felt a distance he couldn't name. They were human, in a way he would never be. They complained about food because food mattered to them. They got tired, they got hungry, they got bored. He envied them. The thought appeared so suddenly and completely that Kal-El stood frozen in the observation deck, staring at his reflection in the armored glass. He envied humans their limitations because limitations created context, created meaning, created the possibility that your choices mattered because you couldn't do everything. Mortarion had already left, fading back into the shadows like poison dissipating, but his words remained. You learn to carry it. Kal-El pressed one hand against the observation window, watching Olenor turn through its rotation, and began the slow, painful process of learning. The distress signal came from Cardia, and it came screaming. Kal-El was in the training cages beneath the Eternal Crusader when the klaxon started, running combat drills against servitor opponents programmed to simulate every enemy the Imperium had catalogued. He'd been at it for 16 hours straight, trying to exhaust himself into something resembling peace. The servitors lasted an average of 4 minutes before he had to requisition new ones. Solar Primarch, priority alert from Segmentum Obscurus, the Vox bled. Chaos incursion detected at Cardia. The Eye of Terror is expanding, requesting immediate deployment of all available Primarch-level assets. Kal-El was in the Strategium 90 seconds later, his uniform still bearing scorch marks from training. The hololithic display showed Cardia's position at the edge of the Eye of Terror, that permanent wound in reality, where the warp bled into real space. Except now the wound was growing, spreading like infection, and pouring through it came ships that made his enhanced vision hurt to perceive. They were wrong, not just hostile, wrong geometries that shouldn't exist, colors that had no names, and leading the fleet was something the display identified as a Black Legion cruiser, but Kal-El's eyes saw deeper, saw the ship's real nature, a vessel held together by spite and suffering, crewed by traitors who'd traded their humanity for power that ate them from the inside. What are we facing? Kal-El asked. The fleet strategist and naval officer named Karstoff, with 40 years of void warfare in his records, looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last hour. Preliminary reports indicate a major chaos incursion. Black Legion, World Eaters, and elements of the Thousand Suns. They're not raiding, sir. They're invading. 16 capital ships have already breached the Cadian gate defenses. The pylons are holding, but barely. Kal-El studied the tactical display, processing fleet positions, defensive structures, civilian population centers. Cadia held 14 billion souls. If the planet fell, the entire segmentum was vulnerable. Current Primarch deployments? Lord Dawn is fortifying the Inwit systems. Lord Gilliman is 3 weeks away in Ultramar. Lord Russ is... Karstoff paused, checking his data slate. Lord Russ is hunting something in the Fenris system and not responding to Vox hails. So I'm closest. By 2 weeks, yes, sir. Kal-El didn't hesitate. Prepare my transport. I'm going to Cardia. Karstoff's expression flickered with something between relief and fear. The Chaos forces are substantial, sir. Perhaps we should wait for additional Legion support. Cardia doesn't have time for waiting. 14 billion people don't have time. He was moving towards the launch bay before Karstoff could respond, his mind already calculating approach vectors, enemy ship classifications, optimal deployment strategies. Behind him, Karstoff muttered something that Kal-El's enhanced hearing caught anyway. Emperor, help us. He thinks he can stop chaos alone. The journey from the fleet to Cardia took 3 hours at maximum burn. Kal-El spent it studying every scrap of intelligence the Imperium had gathered on chaos. It wasn't much. The War Master's betrayal was still fresh, barely a decade old, and the full scope of what the traitor legions had become wasn't yet catalogued. What he read disturbed him more than anything he'd encountered in 17 campaigns. Chaos wasn't an enemy that could be reasoned with or intimidated. It wasn't even an enemy that could be truly killed. It was corruption made manifest, entropy given consciousness, the enemy of order itself, and his transport was flying directly into its largest permanent gateway into real space. As Cardia grew large in the viewport, Kal-El saw the scale of the assault. Dozens of Chaos ships circled the planet like carrion birds. Orbital defense platforms burned in silent explosions. And through it all, the Eye of Terror pulsed with sickly light, visible even through real space. a cosmic wound that made reality itself scream. The Vox crackled with Cadian command frequencies. Unknown vessel, identify yourself or be fired upon. This is your only warning. This is Kal-El, a designated solar Primarch of the Imperial Forces. I'm here to assist in planetary defense. There was a pause, then a woman's voice, hard and controlled. Solar Primarch, this is Castellan Valeria of the Cadian 8th. We're holding the primary hive, but the outer territories are compromised. Chaos forces have established beachheads in 7 locations. We're requesting orbital bombardment on the following coordinates. Negative, Kal-El interrupted. Those coordinates contain civilian populations. Those civilian populations are already lost, sir. We've confirmed demonic possession in 3 of the 7 sites. Bombardment is the only option. Kal-El felt something cold settle in his chest. I can evacuate the civilians before chaos consolidates control? Respectfully, sir, you don't understand what we're facing. Chaos corruption spreads faster than evacuation protocols. Every minute we delay allows the infection to spread. I'm not abandoning 14 billion people to orbital fire. Valeria's voice stayed level, but tension crept in at the edges. Then, what's your alternative, sir? I go down there. I stop the chaos forces. I save who can be saved. The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. When Valeria spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much and believed in too little. Solar Primarch, I've been fighting on Kedia for 12 years. I've watched demons wear the faces of my soldiers. I've seen reality tear open and spit out nightmares. Chaos doesn't lose because someone's strong enough to beat it. It loses because someone's willing to sacrifice everything to contain it. Are you willing to do that? Kal-El stared at the planet below, at the fires spreading across its surface, at the ships circling like predators. I have to believe there's another way. Then you've already lost, she cut the Vox channel. Kal-El's transport broke atmosphere over the primary hive, and the scale of the battle became immediately clear. Cardia was burning, not metaphorically. Actual fire consumed entire districts, but worse than the fire was the corruption. Buildings that bent in directions architecture shouldn't allow, streets that looped back on themselves, civilians transforming into things that screamed with too many mouths. And fighting through it all were the Cadians themselves, ordinary humans in flak armor, carrying laser guns that barely scratched Chaos Marines, holding defensive positions against enemies that killed them in seconds. They died in droves. They died screaming, and they kept fighting anyway because Cardia was their home. And if home burned, they'd burn with it rather than abandon their posts. Kal-El landed in the center of the primary breach zone with enough force to crack pavement. A Chaos Marine, his armor painted in the black and gold of the Black Legion, turned to face him. Spikes jutted from the armor at random angles. The helmet's eye lenses glowed with malevolent intelligence. And when the Chaos Marine spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made reality shudder. The Solar Primarch, the Emperor's perfect weapon. How fascinating that you came alone. Surrender, Kal-El said, because he still believed in procedure. You're in violation of Imperial law. Lay down your weapons and submit to judgment, the Chaos Marine laughed. And the sound was wrong in ways that Kal-El's enhanced senses couldn't quite categorize. Imperial law. Listen to him. He thinks laws matter in the presence of gods. There are no gods, only Xenos, traitors, and the ignorant. And then let me educate you. The Chaos Marine moved fast, faster than a Space Marine should move, enhanced by warp gifts that broke human limitations. His chainsword screamed through the air in an arc designed to bisect Kal-El at the waist. Kal-El caught the blade bare-handed. The chainsword's teeth shattered against his palm, metal fragments spraying across the street. He could have stopped there, could have disabled the Chaos Marine and moved to the next threat. But something in the way the traitor had spoken, in the casual dismissal of human law, in the implication that power justified abandoning humanity's rules, triggered something deep in Kal-El's conditioning. His heat vision burned through the Chaos Marine's helmet, through the skull beneath, through the corrupted brain that had chosen betrayal over duty. The body collapsed, and behind it, 10 more Chaos Marines emerged from the burning buildings. "One down," the leader said, his voice amplified through Vox speakers. "How many thousand more can you kill before we drown you in bodies?" Kal-El didn't answer. He moved. The next 4 minutes reshaped a city block. Kal-El tore through Chaos Marines like they were paper targets, his fists punching through ceramite, his speed making their enhanced reflexes look frozen. He pulled 17 Cadian soldiers out of collapsing buildings, deposited them in safe zones 3 blocks away, and was back in combat before their nervous systems could process the displacement. He intercepted bolter rounds in mid-flight, crushed demon engines with his bare hands, and when a pack of possessed civilians charged him with claws that dripped reality-warping energy, he disabled them without killing, pinning them with rubble until they could be properly restrained and hopefully purified. But for every enemy he defeated, 2 more appeared. For every building he saved, 3 more collapsed, and slowly, carefully, the Chaos forces stopped trying to kill him. They started trying to corrupt him. "You're strong," a voice whispered from everywhere and nowhere. "Stronger than the false emperor's gene-forged sons. Why serve a corpse on a throne? Why limit yourself to humanity's petty laws?" Kal-El ignored it, focusing on the tactical situation. Chaos forces were herding him, using civilian hostages as bait, drawing him deeper into corrupted territory where the warp bled through strongest. "You could rule them," the voice continued, smooth and reasonable. "Protect them, lead them. They're so weak, so fragile. Don't you feel the burden of their limitations? Don't you wish they were stronger?" "They don't need to be stronger," Kal-El said aloud, smashing through a corrupted rhino transport. "They have me. And when you're gone, when you fail, as you failed at Ulanor, what happens to the billions who depend on your impossible strength?" The words hit harder than any physical blow. Kal-El hesitated for just a fraction of a second, his concentration wavering. That fraction was enough. A chaos sorcerer, wrapped in the colors of the 1,000 suns, stepped from a tear in reality and spoke a word that shouldn't exist. The word hit Kal-El like a psychic battering ram. His Kryptonian biology had no defense against it. His mind, trained by the Emperor, but still fundamentally pure, uncorrupted by the warp's influence, reeled under the assault. He didn't fall, didn't break. But for 3 seconds he saw the true scope of chaos, saw the endless cycle of corruption and rebirth, suffering feeding power, feeding suffering in a loop that predated humanity and would outlast it, saw the traitor Primarchs who'd chosen this path, believing their damnation would save something worth saving, saw the Emperor's plan, cold and calculated, and willing to sacrifice billions because saving everyone was never the objective. When his vision cleared, Kal-El stood in the center of a circle of Chaos Marines. They hadn't attacked during his moment of vulnerability. They'd watched, studied. "You see now," the sorcerer said. "The Emperor uses you, sends you to fight battles that can't be won, watching to see how long your hope lasts before it breaks." "My hope isn't the point," Kal-El said, his voice steady despite the revelation still echoing in his mind. "The mission is, even when the mission is futile, especially then." He moved before they could react, crossing 15 meters in a heartbeat, his fist connecting with the sorcerer's chest. But instead of the solid impact he expected, his hand passed through smoke and illusion. The sorcerer's laughter came from behind him. "You can't punch truth, Solar Primarch. You can't intimidate reality into bending to your moral certainty." Kal-El spun, heat vision already firing, but the sorcerer was gone, vanished back into the warp, leaving only mocking words hanging in the air. "We'll meet again, when you're ready to ask the real questions." The Chaos forces retreated, not routed, not defeated. They simply pulled back, fading into the corrupted districts, leaving Kal-El standing alone in a street filled with rubble and the bodies of Cadians who died holding the line. He'd saved hundreds, thousands maybe, and it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Castellan Valeria found him 3 hours later, standing on the outer wall of the primary hive, staring at the Eye of Terror's sickly glow. She approached carefully, her augmetic leg clicking against stone, a low stick burning between her fingers. "You fought well," she said, not quite able to keep the grudging respect from her voice. "Saved a lot of people who'd be dead otherwise. But not all of them. Never all of them. That's not how war works." Kal-El turned to face her. Up close, Valeria looked older than her file indicated, 43 chronologically, but carrying the weight of someone twice that. Scars crossed her face in patterns that told stories of close combat and desperate last stands. "You were right," Kal-El said, "about me not understanding chaos." Valeria took a long drag on her LOO stick, the ember glowing in the darkness. "Most people don't until it's too late. You did better than most, came back sane at least. The sorcerer showed me something, a vision of the Emperor's plan, of what he's willing to sacrifice. And I don't know if I can serve a plan that treats lives as acceptable losses." Valeria's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Then you can't serve the Imperium, because that's all we do, Solar Primarch. We calculate acceptable losses. We sacrifice millions to save billions. We burn planets to save sectors. It's ugly and brutal and completely necessary." "There has to be another way?" "You keep saying that, like if you believe it hard enough, reality will change." She flicked the LNO stick over the wall, watching its ember fall into the darkness below. "I've been fighting on Cardia since I was 16 years old. Lost my parents in the first week, lost my husband in the 5th year, lost my daughter in the 9th. You know what I learned?" Kal-El waited. "That hope isn't about winning. It's about fighting anyway, about holding the line even when you know you're going to lose, because someone behind you might not. That's all we are, Solar Primarch, the line that holds so others don't have to." Below them, work crews cleared rubble, medics triaged the wounded, and in the mess tent, soldiers lined up for rations that looked worse than usual. "Is that actually food?" someone asked. "Technically," another soldier replied, "contains all the nutrition required to keep you alive and miserable. Could use some salt. Could use some taste. Could use some recognition that we're not servitors who only need nutrient paste." But they ate it anyway because hunger was real and immediate, and the grand strategy of the Imperium didn't care about individual preferences. Kal-El heard the exchange and felt that same distance he'd felt after Olanor. They were human. He was just pretending. Valeria watched him, reading something in his expression. "You're wondering if you belong here." It wasn't a question. "I'm wondering if the Emperor made a mistake, taking me in, training me, giving me power without the human context to understand what to do with it. You want to know the truth about what you are?" Kal-El nodded. Valeria pulled out another LHO stick, lit it, and spoke through the smoke. "You're a weapon that wishes it was a person, just like the Space Marines, just like the Primarchs, just like every tool the Emperor ever made. The difference is, you still think wishing matters. Doesn't it? Not to the Imperium, but maybe that's why we need you. Someone who still believes people matter more than calculations." She left him on the wall, limping back toward the command center, leaving Kal-El alone with the Eye of Terror's glow and the weight of 2 failed campaigns pressing against his chest. The Inquisitor arrived on Cardia 6 days after the initial assault, when the fires were mostly contained and the corruption purges had begun in earnest. His name was Torvalds, and he wore the inquisitorial seal like a shield against the questions. Kal-El was summoned to the command center for what the official documentation called a strategic debriefing. What it actually was became clear the moment Torvalds opened his mouth. "The Solar Primarch, the Emperor's found son, the alien weapon wrapped in Imperial colors." Kal-El stood at attention, his military conditioning overriding the instinct to respond to provocation. "I'm here to serve the Imperium, Inquisitor." "Are you?" Torvalds circled him slowly, a predator evaluating prey. "Your genetic structure isn't human. Your power source isn't human. Your psychology, despite decades of conditioning, remains fundamentally non-human. You're an unknown variable in the Emperor's plan. And unknown variables are, by definition, threats." Castellan Valeria, standing at the edge of the room, spoke carefully. "The Solar Primarch saved thousands of lives during the Chaos Assault. His intervention prevented a complete breach of the primary hive defenses." "At what cost?" Torvalds turned to face her. "How many soldiers were exposed to his presence? How many witnessed power that exceeds even Primarch standards? How many now question why they should obey merely human authority when something like him exists?" "That's not what happened," Kal-El started. "Isn't it?" Torvalds pulled out a data slate, scrolling through reports. "Private Marcus Hallen, Cadian 3rd Regiment, quote, he moved like the Emperor himself, made me wonder what we're doing following regular commanders when beings like that exist. Corporal Sia Ven, Kedian's 7th. Quote, if he'd been here from the start, maybe my squad wouldn't be dead, maybe the Imperium's been holding him back. Should I continue? Kal-El felt something cold form in his stomach. I didn't ask for their faith. But you have it anyway, and faith, Solar Primarch, is the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy. Faith in the wrong being starts cults, starts heresies, starts exactly the kind of thinking that leads to chaos, corruption. I've served loyally for 3 decades, under the Emperor's direct supervision and training, but the Emperor is occupied with the Webway project. The War Master, Torvalds paused, the word clearly bitter in his mouth, has betrayed us. The Imperium is fracturing, and you remain an unknown quantity with power that rivals the traitor Primarchs. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Valeria stepped forward, her voice carefully neutral. What exactly are you proposing, Inquisitor? Observation, restriction. The Solar Primarch will be confined to fleet duty until a full psychological and spiritual evaluation can be completed. No ground deployments, no direct contact with Imperial citizens or military personnel beyond command staff. His presence creates more problems than it solves. That's unacceptable, Kal-El said, his voice hard. There's a war happening. People are dying. You want to sideline me because soldiers respect competence? I want to protect the Imperium from potential corruption vectors, Torvalds replied. Your intentions are irrelevant. Your effect is what matters, and your effect is undermining the chain of command. By being effective? By being inhuman. The word cut deeper than any weapon. Kal-El stood very still, processing the accusation, running through years of service and victories and careful adherence to Imperial doctrine, and finding no defense that wouldn't sound like exactly what Torvalds expected. Alien logic, trying to justify alien existence. I was raised human, Kal-El said finally. Trained human. I think in human terms, value human life, follow human laws. Because you were conditioned to. Because the Emperor molded you into a useful tool. But conditioning isn't nature, Solar Primarch. And when the conditioning fails, when you're faced with choices the Emperor didn't prepare you for, what then? Do you default to human morality, or to whatever drives your actual species? Kal-El had no answer, because Torvalds had identified the question that had been growing in his mind since Ulanor, since Cardia, since every moment of distance between himself and the people he was supposed to protect. 72 hours, Torvalds said. You have 72 hours to conclude any active operations on Cadia. After that you return to the fleet and await formal evaluation. This is not negotiable. He left, his inquisitorial seal granting him authority that even a Primarch-level asset couldn't easily challenge. Valeria waited until the door sealed before speaking. He's wrong, you saved lives here, that matters. Does it? Kal-El turned to face her. If saving lives creates political problems, causes soldiers to question command, undermines Imperial authority, does the saving actually help? Or does it just create different problems? Those are Inquisitor questions. Paranoid, political questions. Don't let him make you doubt. I've been doubting since Ulanor. The admission came out harder than intended. I thought power was enough, thought being strong enough to save everyone was all that mattered. But power without context is just force. And I don't have context. I don't get tired, don't get hungry, don't feel pain the way humans do. How am I supposed to make moral decisions for humanity when I'm not human? Valeria studied him for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. Not cruel, tired. You know what makes you human, Solar Primarch? That question, that doubt. Space Marines don't doubt. They're conditioned past it. Primarchs don't doubt. They're too certain of their purpose. But you're standing here questioning whether you have the right to help people. That's more human than half the Imperium's leadership. Or it's alien psychology, struggling to understand the species I'm trying to protect. Maybe, but I'd rather be protected by someone who questions their right to power than someone who's certain they deserve it. She saluted, formal and precise. 72 hours, sir. Make them count. Kal-El spent the next 3 days doing what he did best, saving people. He didn't engage chaos forces, didn't pursue glory or tactical victories. He just worked, pulled survivors from collapsed buildings, cleared rubble so repair crews could access damaged infrastructure, used his heat vision to weld broken water pipes, and his strength to lift fallen support beams. Unglamorous work, necessary work, human work. On the second day, a child asked him why he helped. The girl couldn't have been more than 8, covered in dust from the building collapse he'd just cleared. Her parents were dead, her home was ash, but she looked up at him with eyes that still held curiosity instead of despair. Because it's right, Kal-El said, the answer automatic. But you're so strong. You could be anywhere, do anything. Why waste time with small stuff? Kal-El knelt to her level, his cape settling around him like a red shroud. Nothing that helps people is small. But you could save more people if you fought the bad guys instead of moving rocks. She wasn't wrong. The tactical calculus was obvious. His time was more valuable in combat operations than reconstruction. Every hour spent clearing rubble was an hour not spent preventing the next attack. It was the same logic that justified orbital bombardment of corrupted populations. The same logic that made lives into numbers and numbers into acceptable losses. Maybe, Kal-El admitted, but you needed help now, not after the war's over. Now. The girl considered this with the seriousness children bring to important questions. Are you an angel? The priests talk about the Emperor's angels. I'm just someone trying to help. That's what angels do, dummy. She wandered off toward the refugee processing center, leaving Kal-El kneeling in the rubble, staring at his hands. These hands had killed Chaos Marines, had demolished buildings and crushed war machines, had been measured by the Emperor himself and found useful enough to shape into a weapon, but right now they were just hands, clearing rocks, helping a child who'd lost everything. And for the first time since Ulanor, Kal-El felt like maybe that was enough. On the third day, as his deadline approached, Valeria found him in the lower hive levels, reinforcing a damaged support pillar that held up 3 million tons of city above it. Inquisitor's transport arrived, she said. You're out of time. His pillar needs another 2 hours of work. You need to leave in 20 minutes. Kal-El pressed his shoulder against the ferrocrete, applying precisely calculated pressure to prevent collapse while he welded stress fractures. Can't. If I leave now, this section fails. 14,000 people live in the structures above. And if you disobey the Inquisition, you become a rogue element. They'll declare you compromised, hunt you, turn the Imperium's full weight against you. Let them. The words came out flat and certain. I'm not abandoning these people because bureaucracy has a schedule. Valeria was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried something close to respect. You understand what you're choosing. Once you cross this line, there's no going back. You'll be outside the Emperor's protection, outside the Imperium's structure. I was always outside. Torvalds was right about that much. I'm not human. Never was. I've just been pretending, following rules that don't actually fit, trying to be useful in a system built for a species I don't belong to. So what's the alternative? Kal-El finished the weld, checked the pillar's structural integrity, and stepped back. The support held. 14,000 lives continued, unaware how close they'd come to ending. I keep helping, without the Imperium's approval, without the Emperor's guidance, just helping because it's right. That's desertion. That's service. He turned to face her, and his eyes held something Valeria had never seen before, absolute certainty uncompromised by doubt. The Imperium taught me duty, the Emperor taught me power, but neither taught me that sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same. I'm learning that now. Valeria's hand moved towards her sidearm, old instincts warring with new understanding. She was Cadian, loyal to her last breath. Disobedience was heresy, and heresy was death. But she'd also spent 3 days watching the solar Primarch clear rubble with the same intensity most warriors brought to battle. Watched him treat reconstruction like sacred duty. Watched him choose people over protocol again and again. Her hand fell away from her weapon. I can't help you. Can't cover for you. You know that. I know. The Inquisition will hunt you. Maybe the Space Marines too. You'll be alone. I've always been alone. He flew straight up through 200 levels of Hive City, emerging into Cardia's toxic sky, and didn't look back. Behind him, Valeria stood in the lower Hive levels and made a choice that would haunt her for the rest of her career. She reached for her Vox and activated the command frequency. Command, this is Castellan Valeria, reporting last known position of the solar Primarch. She paused, weighing duty against conscience, protocol against pragmatism. Then she gave coordinates for a location 300 kilometers from where Kal-El had actually been. Target heading north-northwest, speed estimated of Mach 2. It would buy him maybe 4 hours, maybe enough to get clear of the system. Probably not enough to matter, but it was what she could give, and sometimes that had to be enough. In orbit, Inquisitor Torvalds received the report and felt cold satisfaction settle in his chest. The alien had revealed itself, chosen its nature over its conditioning, proven that no amount of training could override fundamental otherness. He would be hunted, captured, studied, and if necessary, destroyed. The Imperium protected humanity, and humanity's protection sometimes required eliminating the things that wore human faces while serving inhuman purposes. The hunt began. Kal-El spent 6 weeks running, and in those 6 weeks he saved more lives than in his previous 3 decades of Imperial service. He appeared on agri-worlds facing orc raids, holding defensive lines while civilians evacuated, materialized on hive worlds during industrial disasters, preventing reactor meltdowns and collapsing manufactorums, flew into war zones the Imperium had marked as acceptable losses and made them unacceptable victories instead. He didn't announce himself, didn't file reports, didn't coordinate with Imperial Command. He just helped, then vanished before the Inquisition could triangulate his position, and with each intervention his legend grew. The solar Primarch, the rogue angel, the Emperor's lost son, who chose humanity over the Imperium. Soldiers whispered about him in mess halls, refugees prayed to him in makeshift shrines, and the Inquisition's hunt intensified with each report of his activities, because unauthorized faith was exactly the kind of corruption Torvalds had warned about. The call came on a frozen morning above a world called Valhalla. Kal-El was repairing an orbital defense platform damaged in a recent Dark Eldar raid, working in hard vacuum, when his salvaged Vox unit crackled with an emergency frequency. This is Captain Davos of the Imperial Guard, 5th Valhallan Regiment. We're under attack by unknown Xenos forces, requesting immediate assistance from any available Imperial assets. Our position is... The transmission cut to screaming, then static, then silence. Kal-El traced the signal source, a minor research outpost on Valhalla's northern continent, barely registered in Imperial records, population 400 researchers and support staff, strategic value minimal. The kind of place the Imperium would classify as acceptable loss if defending it cost more than the resources justified. He was there in 12 minutes. The outpost was chaos when he arrived, not chaos with a capital C, but the regular kind. Panicked civilians running through corridors, alarms blaring, and through the walls, the sound of weapons fire and inhuman screeching. Kal-El punched through the outer wall into the main research bay and found himself face to face with something he'd never encountered before. The creatures were insectoid, roughly humanoid in shape, but wrong in every detail. Chitin armor, too many limbs. Heads that split open to reveal weapon symbiotes that fired living ammunition. And behind them, pouring through a breach in the outpost's foundation, came more. Hundreds more. The researchers were dying. The guard soldiers were dying faster. And in the center of the research bay, protected by a failing void shield, sat something that made Kal-El's enhanced vision struggle to focus. A device that looked like crystallized geometry, pulsing with energy that felt simultaneously ancient and impossible. One of the Xenos creatures turned toward him, its head splitting open, weapon symbiote charging. Kal-El moved first. His fist caved in the creature's thorax. It died without sound, collapsing into a puddle of ichor that steamed against the cold floor. The other creatures noticed, and instead of retreating, they all turned to face him, perfectly synchronized, moving as one organism instead of individuals. "Contact!" a guard soldier shouted. "Unknown ally engaging hostiles. All units fall back to secondary positions." Kal-El tore through the Xenos swarm. His heat vision carved paths through their ranks. His fists shattered chitin. His speed made their reactions look frozen. In 90 seconds, he'd killed 47 of them. And in those 90 seconds, three things became clear. First, these creatures were highly organized, operating with hive mind coordination that made orc tactics look primitive. Second, they were incredibly numerous, with reinforcements pouring through the breach faster than he could eliminate them. Third, they were specifically targeting the strange device in the center of the research bay, ignoring easier targets to reach it. Kal-El dropped in front of the device, positioning himself as a physical barrier. "What is this?" he called to the nearest researcher, a woman in her 50s with blood streaming from a head wound. "A beacon," she shouted over the weapon's fire. "We found it in the northern ice fields. It's been broadcasting for months before we realized. We thought it was geological interference." A Xenos creature lunged past Kal-El's guard. Reaching for the beacon, he caught it mid-flight and crushed its skull, but two more took its place. They weren't trying to destroy the device. They were trying to touch it, activate it, complete whatever signal it had been broadcasting. "Shut it down," Kal-El ordered. "We can't. The activation sequence is alien technology. We don't understand the command protocols." The researcher was sobbing now, her scientific composure cracked by terror and guilt. "We thought we were studying it. We didn't know we were calling them." More creatures poured through the breach. The guard soldiers' laser guns carved through chitin, but for every creature that fell, three more appeared. The mathematics was simple and brutal. The defenders would be overwhelmed in minutes. Kal-El made a decision. He grabbed the beacon with both hands, feeling its surface burn against his palms with energy that wasn't quite heat and wasn't quite electricity, and he pulled. The device resisted. Whatever power source drove it was anchored to something deeper than the physical structure, anchored to the planet itself maybe, or to the warp, or to whatever dimension these creatures called home. Kal-El pulled harder. His Kryptonian strength, enhanced by decades under a yellow sun, pushed against forces that predated human understanding of physics. The beacon cracked, energy exploded outward in a pulse that sent creatures flying, that shattered windows and collapsed support beams, that made reality itself scream in protest. And then it went silent, dead, inert. The Xenos creatures froze. For 3 seconds they stood perfectly still, their hive mind coordination disrupted by the beacon's destruction. Then they began to retreat, flowing back through the breach like water draining from a broken dam, leaving behind corpses and the survivors who stared at Kal-El with expressions caught between gratitude and fear. Captain Davos approached carefully, his laser gun still raised. "Identify yourself." "I'm here to help." "That's not an identification." Davos was young, maybe 30, with the kind of face that had seen combat but not yet been broken by it. "The Solar Primarch. You're the rogue asset the Inquisition's hunting." "I'm someone who heard a distress call and responded by destroying our research sample. Do you have any idea what that device was worth? The Mechanicum would have paid." "It was calling those creatures," Kal-El interrupted. "Every hour it stayed active, more would come. I saved your lives. You made that decision unilaterally, without consulting command, without considering strategic implications." Davos lowered his laser gun, but his expression stayed hard. "That's not how the Imperial military operates." "I know." Kal-El looked at the dead beacon, at the ichor-stained floor, at the soldiers and researchers who'd survived because he'd broken protocol again. "But your command wasn't here. I was." The researcher who'd explained the beacon stumbled forward, her head wound still bleeding. "He's right, Captain. The beacon was accelerating. Whatever it was calling, they were coming faster. Another hour, and—" She collapsed. Kal-El caught her before she hit the ground, his enhanced vision immediately cataloging her injuries. Severe concussion, internal bleeding, shock setting in. She needed medical attention in minutes, not hours. "Your medical bay?" he asked. "Destroyed in the first wave," Davos replied. "Nearest hospital is 200 kilometers south. Our transport's damaged. We've already called for evacuation, but response time is—" "Too slow." Kal-El lifted the researcher carefully. "I'll take her. You'll be spotted. The Inquisition has tracking stations across this sector. The moment you fly, they'll know your position." "I know." He was airborne before Davos could respond, breaking through the damaged ceiling and into Valhalla's frozen sky, the researcher cradled in his arms. Behind him, the captain watched with an expression that said he'd be filing a report, and that report would make the hunt even harder. The hospital was a small facility serving 3 scattered settlements, understaffed and overwhelmed by the regular casualties of frontier life. Kal-El landed on the roof, triggering every alarm in the building, and carried the researcher through corridors filled with shocked medical personnel. "She needs immediate surgery," he told the first doctor he found. "Subdural hematoma, internal bleeding, possible spinal trauma." The doctor stared at him for 3 full seconds, processing the appearance of a legend carrying a dying woman through his emergency ward. Then his medical training overrode his shock. "Bay 3, move!" Kal-El deposited the researcher on the surgical table and stepped back and prepared to leave. But the doctor grabbed his arm, surprising strength in the grip. "Wait, there are others from the outpost. They came in 20 minutes ago. We're doing what we can, but we're not equipped for mass casualties. We need more supplies, more staff, more—" "I'll get them." Kal-El was moving before the doctor finished speaking, flying to the nearest Imperial depot, breaking through security protocols that should have stopped him, loading medical supplies that weren't technically his to take. Theft, that's what it was. Unauthorized requisition of Imperial resources, another charge to add to the growing list. He didn't care. For the next 4 hours, Kal-El became a supply line. Medical equipment, trauma surgeons from neighboring facilities, plasma reserves, antibiotics, everything the hospital needed, delivered faster than official channels would have allowed, stacked in the corridors by a rogue asset who'd decided that saving lives mattered more than following procedure. And in the 4th hour, the Inquisition arrived. 3 ships dropped out of orbit, surrounding the hospital in a triangular formation. Torvald's voice came through every speaker in the building, amplified by vox casters that made his words feel like divine judgment. "Solar Primarch, you are in violation of inquisitorial decree. Surrender immediately and submit to custody. Resistance will be met with lethal force and classified as heresy." Kal-El stood on the hospital roof, looking at the ships above, calculating trajectories and weapon ranges and the probable civilian casualties if this turned into combat. The math was bad. The hospital sat in the center of a settlement. 15,000 people lived within the blast radius if those ships opened fire. He could escape, could fly faster than their targeting systems could track, disappear into Valhalla's frozen wastes, continue his unauthorized mission somewhere else, but leaving meant the Inquisition would occupy the hospital, would interrogate the staff, would investigate who'd helped him, who'd looked the other way, who'd accepted stolen supplies without asking questions. People would suffer for his choices. The doctor who'd grabbed his arm appeared on the roof, breathing hard from the climb. "Don't surrender, please. We need you. Not just here, everywhere. Someone who actually helps instead of just calculating acceptable losses. If I don't surrender, they'll level this building. Then we evacuate, we run, we up. You can't run from the Inquisition." Kal-El turned to face the doctor, and his expression held the weight of 6 weeks running, 6 weeks watching his legend grow, while his actual impact remained confined to small interventions that the Imperium's bureaucracy could have handled better if it cared to. "I made a choice on Cadia. Chose people over protocol, thought that was enough, but it's not. Every life I save creates new problems, creates faith I didn't ask for, questions about authority I can't answer, complications in a system that needs simple obedience to function. So you're giving up. I'm accepting that I don't have better answers than the Imperium does. Just different problems." The doctor's face twisted with betrayal and disappointment. "Then you're not a hero. You're just another weapon that got lost." The words hurt more than they should have. Kal-El activated his Vox link, broadcasting on the inquisitorial frequency. "I'm coming up, unarmed. Don't fire on the hospital." He flew towards the central ship slowly, his hands spread wide, every movement designed to communicate non-threat. The ship's hangar bay opened like a mechanical mouth, and Kal-El flew inside, landing on deck plating that had been scored by years of military operations. Torvalds waited with 20 armed soldiers, their weapons trained on him with professional precision. "The prodigal weapon returns," the Inquisitor said. "Did you enjoy your little rebellion? I saved lives. You stole Imperial property, defied inquisitorial authority, created unauthorized cult following among civilian populations. These are not small violations, Solar Primarch. I know." Kal-El stood perfectly still, letting them see his surrender. "What happens now?" "Now we determine whether you're salvageable," Torvalds gestured, and the soldiers moved forward with the restraints designed for containing Primarch-level threats. "You'll be taken to Terra, evaluated by the Emperor himself if he can spare the attention, and if you're found too corrupted by your alien nature to continue serving, then I'll be destroyed. Then you'll be neutralized. The Emperor wastes nothing." The restraints locked around Kal-El's wrists, nullifying fields humming with power drawn from the ship's reactor. They couldn't actually hold him if he chose to break free, but breaking free meant combat, meant casualties, meant proving Torvald's right about his fundamental incompatibility with Imperial order. So he stood still and let himself be bound, let himself be led to a holding cell designed for containing threats too dangerous to kill, but too valuable to ignore. And in the cell, alone with his thoughts and the weight of 2 failed campaigns and 6 weeks of futile independence, Kal-El finally understood what the Emperor had seen when he'd pulled an infant from a crashed pod on Barbarous. Not a son, not a soldier, a weapon that would eventually have to choose between its nature and its nurture, and either choice would hurt. The journey to Terra took 3 weeks. Kal-El spent it in the holding cell, watched by surveillance systems and guards who rotated every 6 hours, their fear of him palpable even through the bulkheads. He didn't try to escape, didn't test the restraints, didn't do anything except think about the choices that had led him here and whether any of them had actually mattered. On the 18th day, something changed. The ship lurched, reality screaming as it was pulled from the warp too early. Alarms blared. Soldiers ran through corridors, and through the cell's monitoring systems, Kal-El heard the words that made his enhanced metabolism spike with adrenaline. Multiple contacts, unknown configuration, they're everywhere. The Tyranids had found them. Kal-El didn't know that word yet, wouldn't learn it for another hour. But he understood threat, understood the sound of weapons fire, and hull breaches, and soldiers dying with inhuman screeching as their final soundtrack. The cell door remained locked. He could break it, could break the restraints, could intervene in whatever battle was happening above him, but he'd surrendered. Given his word to submit to Imperial judgment, breaking that word meant validating every accusation Torvalds had made about his alien unreliability. The ship shuddered. Something massive had impacted the hull. The lights flickered, emergency backup systems engaging. And through the surveillance feed, Kal-El watched as creatures that shouldn't exist poured through breached bulkheads. They were biological nightmares. Too many teeth, too many claws, too many variations on the theme of killing. Small ones that moved like insects, large ones that moved like living tanks. And behind them, something that made the surveillance cameras struggle to maintain focus. A creature that pulsed with psychic pressure. Its presence in the materium like a wound that thought the hive tyrant had come aboard. Kal-El heard Torvald's voice over the Vox system, strained but controlled. "All hands, repel boarders, secure the..." Screaming cut him off, then static, then nothing. The surveillance feed showed the hive tyrant moving through corridors, killing soldiers who tried to stop it, absorbing their biomass through processes that defied sanity. It was heading toward the bridge, toward the ship's command structure. And after it took command, it would take the ship, would use the vessel to reach Terra, carrying its invasion force directly into the heart of the Imperium. Kal-El sat in his cell and performed the coldest calculation of his life. If he broke free, saved the ship, and stopped the Tyranid assault, he'd prove Torvalds wrong about his reliability, would demonstrate that even under restraint, even after surrendering, his loyalty to humanity outweighed his obedience to protocol. But he'd also prove Torvalds right about his alien nature, would show that his moral compass operated independently of Imperial authority, that he made decisions based on his own judgment rather than the chain of command, that he was, fundamentally, ungovernable. The ship shuddered again. More breaches, more casualties. Kal-El could hear the soldiers dying, could count them by their screams, could map the Tyranid advance through audio alone, and know with perfect certainty that in 12 minutes the bridge would fall. In 20 minutes the ship would be a Tyranid vessel. In 3 hours it would reach Terra's outer defenses carrying nightmares in its hold. He closed his eyes, thought about the Emperor pulling an infant from a crashed pod, seeing potential instead of threat. No, thought about 30 years of perfect service and 2 campaigns that had taught him the limits of power without wisdom. Thought about the doctor's words, "You're just another weapon that got lost." The restraints shattered. The cell door exploded outward, and Kal-El moved through the ship like a golden meteor faster than the Tyranids could track. His heat vision carving through kite in his fists, pulverizing biological armor that had evolved to withstand bolter fire. He cleared 3 decks in 4 minutes, saved 17 soldiers who'd been pinned by Tyranid warriors. Reached the bridge approach corridor just as the hive tyrant smashed through the final blast door. The creature turned to face him, and Kal-El felt its psychic pressure like weight against his mind. Not words, not thoughts, just hunger, pure, cosmic hunger that had consumed 1,000 galaxies and would consume 1,000 more. The hunger that made chaos look like philosophical disagreement. "You're not taking this ship," Kal-El said, and launched himself forward. The fight lasted 6 minutes and reshaped the corridor. into abstract art. The Hive Tyrant was fast, strong, and equipped with biological weapons that adapted in real time to his tactics. When he used heat vision, it developed reflective armor. When he used strength, it grew blade limbs that could cut Kryptonian skin. When he used speed, it released spores that tracked movement through air displacement. But Kal-El had 3 decades of combat experience and the desperate knowledge that losing meant Terra's fall. He fought with everything the Emperor had taught him and everything his alien nature provided. He broke the Hive Tyrant's limbs, crushed its weapons, drove it back through the corridor it had carved, past the corpses of soldiers it had consumed, until they reached the breach point where the Tyranids had entered. And there, with the void of space visible through the hull tear, Kal-El made his final move. He grabbed the Hive Tyrant by its massive skull and flew straight through the breach into hard vacuum, carrying the creature away from the ship, away from Terra, out into the infinite dark, where its death wouldn't contaminate the vessel with spores or genetic material. The Tyranid fought even in vacuum, clawed at him, tried to bite, released toxins that would have killed any human in seconds. But Kal-El didn't need to breathe, didn't need atmosphere or pressure, or any of the things that made humans vulnerable. He just flew, faster and faster, until the ship was a distant point of light. Then he tore the Hive Tyrant in half and let the pieces drift in opposite directions, their biological matter freezing instantly in the absolute cold. When he returned to the ship, the remaining Tyranids were dead or dying, cut off from their command organism, their hive mind coordination shattered. The soldiers had rallied, pushing back the leaderless creatures with concentrated fire, and in the bridge, Torvald stood among the corpses of his command crew, staring at Kal-El through the shattered blast door. "You broke containment. I saved your life. You proved my point." Torvald's voice was flat. "You can't be controlled. Can't be trusted to follow orders when your judgment says otherwise. You're a liability, Solar Primarch, a weapon that chooses its own targets." Kal-El stood in the corridor, his uniform torn and stained with alien ichor, and felt the weight of the accusation settle like chain around his neck. "What would you have had me do? Stay in the cell while the Tyranids took the ship? Yes, because that's what orders mean. Obedience regardless of outcome. Trust in the chain of command even when it seems wrong." Torvald stepped forward, and his face held something close to pity. "You'll never understand that, will you? Because you're not human." "Not really. You wear the uniform and speak the words and follow the forms, but when it matters, when the choice is between obedience and your own judgment, you choose yourself every time." "I choose to help." "Same thing." The Inquisitor turned away, surveying the damage. "We continue to Terra. You'll face the Emperor's judgment. And I suspect he'll reach the same conclusion I have. You're too dangerous to remain free." Terra appeared in the viewport like a wound that had scarred over, its surface covered in city sprawl and fortress architecture, its sky filled with orbital platforms and defense stations that could crack planets. Kal-El watched it grow closer and felt something he'd never felt before, genuine fear, not of death, not of pain, of judgment, from the only being in the galaxy whose opinion actually mattered to him, the Emperor, his father, in the only way that word had ever had meaning. The ship docked at the inner palace, where even Primarchs required special clearance to enter. Kal-El was escorted through corridors of gold and marble, past custodian guards who watched him with the cold assessment of apex predators evaluating potential threats. They descended, down through layers of palace architecture, down through the bones of ancient mountains, down into the Webway Gate, where the Emperor labored on his grand project. Threats. They descended, down through layers of palace architecture, down through the bones of ancient mountains, down into the Webway Gate, where the Emperor labored on his grand project, fighting a war that the Imperium barely understood. The gate chamber was massive, a cavern carved from Terra's bedrock and reinforced with technologies that made Kal-El's enhanced vision struggle to process. Psychic energy pulsed through crystalline structures, reality bent around doorways that led to places outside normal space, and in the center, blazing like a golden sun, stood the Emperor of mankind. He looked the same as he had 30 years ago, immortal, perfect, impossibly powerful. But Kal-El's enhanced senses detected something new, exhaustion. The Emperor was fighting constantly, holding the Webway Gate closed against demonic incursion, maintaining a war on a front, fighting a war that the Imperium barely understood. The gate chamber was massive, a cavern carved from Terra's bedrock and reinforced with technologies that made Kal-El's enhanced vision struggle to process. Psychic energy pulsed through crystalline structures, reality bent around doorways that led to places outside normal space, fighting a war that the Imperium barely understood. The gate chamber was massive, a cavern carved from Terra's bedrock and reinforced with technologies that made Kal-El's enhanced vision struggle to process. Psychic energy pulsed through crystalline structures, reality bent around doorways that led to places outside normal space, and in the center, blazing like a golden sun, stood the Emperor of Mankind. He looked the same as he had 30 years ago, immortal, perfect, impossibly powerful. But Kal-El's enhanced senses detected something new: exhaustion. The Emperor was fighting constantly, holding the webway gate closed against demonic incursion, maintaining a war on a front. And in the center, blazing like a golden sun, stood the Emperor of Mankind. He looked the same as he had 30 years ago, immortal, perfect, impossibly powerful. But Kal-El's enhanced senses detected something new: exhaustion. The Emperor was fighting constantly, holding the webway gate closed against demonic incursion, maintaining a war on a front that only he could see. Kal-El, the Emperor's voice resonated through the chamber and through Kal-El's mind simultaneously. You've disappointed me. The words hurt worse that only he could see. Kal-El, the Emperor's voice resonated through the chamber and through Kal-El's mind simultaneously. You've disappointed me. The words hurt worse than any physical wound. Kal-El dropped to one knee, formal military protocol, and kept his eyes down. I failed at Ulanor, failed at Cardia. Worse than any physical wound. Kal-El dropped to one knee, formal military protocol, and kept his eyes down. I failed at Ulanor, failed at Cardia. Disobeyed orders. I have no defense except that I tried to help. You tried to be human. The Emperor moved closer, his presence overwhelming even Kal-El's enhanced resilience. I took you from that pod knowing what you were: an alien, a refugee from a dead world, a being with power that exceeded my Primarchs. By the belief that his power obligated him to help, regardless of what orders said. What would you have me do with you? The Emperor asked. You're too powerful to imprison, too visible to execute, too psychologically human to simply reprogram, and too fundamentally alien to ever truly integrate into Imperial hierarchy. You're a problem without a clean solution. Kal-El met the Emperor's gaze, golden eyes on golden eyes, and spoke the truth he'd been avoiding for months. Then let me leave. Release me from Imperial service. I'll go somewhere far from human space. Find a place where my help doesn't create political complications, where saving lives doesn't undermine authority structures. And when the Tyranids come, when chaos spreads, when the galaxy burns and you have the power to stop it, will you stand aside because it's not your responsibility anymore? I don't know. The admission came out quiet but honest. I don't know if I can stop helping. Don't know if my nature allows that kind of neutrality. But I know I can't keep serving an Imperium that treats every saved life as a strategic failure. The Emperor studied him for a long moment, and in that moment Kal-El felt the full weight of an intelligence that had guided humanity for thousands of years, felt himself measured against calculations. And in that moment Kal-El felt the full weight of an intelligence that had guided humanity for thousands of years, felt himself measured against calculations that spanned centuries and found, what, useful, dangerous, broken? I am giving you a choice, the Emperor said finally. One choice, one time, with no possibility of reversal. It spanned centuries and found, what, useful, dangerous, broken? I am giving you a choice, the Emperor said finally. One choice, one time, with no possibility of reversal. You can stay. Accept full inquisitorial oversight. Serve only when ordered. Save only who the Imperium designates as strategically valuable. Become the weapon I tried to make you, or you can leave. Take a ship. Go beyond Imperial borders. Live according to your own judgment, in places where your help won't complicate my plans. But if you leave permanently. No returning if you change your mind. No Imperial support if you face threats you can't handle alone. You'll be outside my protection, outside humanity's structure, and subject to the same laws that govern all Xenos who operate independently of Imperial authority. You'd classify me as Xenos. You are Xenos. You can stay. Accept full inquisitorial oversight. Serve only when ordered. Save only who the Imperium designates as strategically valuable. Become the weapon I tried to make you, or you can leave. Take a ship. Go beyond Imperial borders. Live according to your own judgment, in places where your help won't complicate my plans. But if you leave permanently. No returning if you change your mind. No Imperial support if you face threats you can't handle alone. You'll be outside my protection, outside humanity's structure, and subject to the same laws that govern all Xenos who operate independently of Imperial authority. You'd classify me as Xenos. You are Xenos. lives. The Emperor nodded, and his expression held something that might have been disappointment or might have been relief. There's a ship waiting in Bay 17, preloaded with supplies, enough to reach the eastern fringe and beyond. The Inquisition won't hunt you if you leave Imperial space. You'll simply be forgotten. Another experiment that didn't work. Another tool that proved unsuitable. Thank you, Kal-El meant it, for taking me in, for trying to give me purpose, for teaching me what duty meant, even if I couldn't fully embrace it. Don't thank me. I used you, tried to weaponize you, failed because your psychology remained fundamentally alien, despite all my efforts. The Emperor turned back toward the webway gate, his attention already shifting to the endless war he fought. Go, Kal-El, find whatever peace beings like you can find. And if you encounter threats beyond your capacity, remember that I warned you, no one survives alone forever. Kal-El walked through the corridors alone. Efforts. The Emperor turned back toward the webway gate, his attention already shifting to the endless war he fought. Go, Kal-El, find whatever peace beings like you can find. And if you encounter threats beyond your capacity, remember that I warned you, no one survives alone forever. Kal-El walked through the corridors alone. Efforts. The Emperor turned back toward the webway gate, his attention already shifting to the endless war he fought. Go, Kal-El, find whatever peace beings like you can find. And if you encounter threats beyond your capacity, remember that I warned you, no one survives alone forever. Kal-El walked through the corridors alone, his red cape dragging across marble floors, past custodians who watched but didn't stop him. He found the ship waiting as promised, a small frigate, fast and well supplied, marked with no Imperial insignia. Inside the cockpit sat a data slate with a single message. The Eastern Fringe has worlds that need heroes. Find. And if you encounter threats beyond your capacity, remember that I warned you, no one survives alone forever. Kal-El walked through the corridors alone, his red cape dragging across marble floors, past custodians who watched but didn't stop him. He found the ship waiting as promised, a small frigate, fast and well supplied, marked with no Imperial insignia. Inside the cockpit sat a data slate with a single message. The Eastern Fringe has worlds that need heroes, Imperial control, worlds where your help won't complicate my plans. If you must save people, save them there. The Emperor, Kal-El, lifted the data slate, read the message 3 times, and then activated the ship systems. The engines hummed to life, terror fell away beneath him, and for the first time in 30 years, his red cape dragging across marble floors, past custodians who watched but didn't stop him. He found the ship waiting as promised, a small frigate, fast and well supplied, marked with no Imperial insignia. Inside the cockpit sat a data slate with a single message. The Eastern Fringe has worlds that need heroes. At time hauling ferrocrete. Most angels in the stories don't exist. Kal-El accepted the water even though he didn't need it because refusing felt rude. Real help is usually boring. Yeah, well, boring's keeping us alive. Orc scouts haven't breached the perimeter since you showed up. She took a drag on her LHO stick, studying him with the assessing gaze of someone who'd survived by reading people. Why here? You could be anywhere. Do anything. Why waste time on a settlement that's not even on Imperial charts? Because you need help, that's enough. Is it? Cass smiled, tired and genuine. Most people need a better reason than that. Need profit or glory, or at least acknowledgement. You just help like it's obvious. Isn't it? Cass laughed. Maybe in whatever corner of the galaxy you came from. Out here, kindness is the rarest resource. She finished her LHO stick and ground it under her boot. Stay as long as you want. Settlement's yours, as much as anyone's. She walked away, leaving Kal-El alone with the half-repaired wall and the sound of morning duty shifts changing over. In the settlement's communal kitchen, people lined up for breakfast rations that looked like grey paste and probably tasted worse. This food's horrible, someone complained. Could be worse. Could be the stuff they served on my last world. That was brown paste. What's the difference? The brown paste had texture. This is just sad. Someone laughed. People ate their terrible food and complained about it and went to their work shifts because life continued even when it was hard and boring and repetitive. Kal-El listened from 50 meters away and felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, but something close. A sense that maybe the Emperor had been right. Some beings needed to serve outside the structures that defined everyone else, needed to help without asking permission or calculating strategic value. In orbit, invisible and unnoticed, a small monitoring station recorded his activities. The Inquisition watched, as they'd always watched, making sure the solar Primarch stayed beyond Imperial borders, making sure his help didn't complicate the Imperium's plans. And on Terra, in the depths of the Imperial Palace, the Emperor paused in his endless war for just a fraction of a second, felt Kal-El's presence in the Materium like a distant star, considered the Xenos who'd tried so hard to be human, who'd ultimately chosen to be himself instead. And then the Emperor returned to his work, his grand plan, his calculated sacrifice of billions to save trillions. The galaxy turned. Kal-El lifted another ferrocrete block into place, reinforcing a wall that would probably break again in the next raid, and somewhere in the Imperium's vast bureaucracy, a report was filed, stamped, and buried. Subject, Solar Primarch. Status, contained through exile. Threat level, acceptable. Recommendation, continue monitoring. Take no action unless subject re-enters Imperial space. The report went into archives that would be lost during the fall of Terra 10,000 years later, but the small rebellions against entropy continued. Walls got repaired, people got fed, settlements endured, and in the infinite dark between stars, a refugee from a dead world kept helping because it was right, and right was enough.